Welcome to my talk about bees, honey, and Bhutan. So I hope that you're all having a great day today. It's starting to get a bit warmer. The bees are buzzing a bit more. So really exciting time of year as we start to see the plants coming back to life and the bees re-emerging. So I thought it was an ideal time to share one of my favorite trips ever, which was my trip to Bhutan, which was back in 2018, so a little while ago. But it was such an incredible trip and one that I just learned so much from, and I have got so much to share about it. So let me get on and start telling you all about this amazing place and what the sort of things that I learned from traveling in this place. Now, I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping. So if you've got any questions, just type them in the comments and I will have a look at them at the end. And, just say hello, put in the comments who you are, what you're, why you've joined me today, what it is that you're interested in, and, really sort of get involved. I'd love to know if you've been to Bhutan or what it is that you're interested in about the bees in Bhutan. So today I'm going to talk about the various bee species in Bhutan and where the bees are across Bhutan. And also I'm going to taste some of the honeys that I brought back from there and talk about the beekeepers that I met while I was exploring the place. And I'm also going to touch a bit on the Buddhism and bees, because this time next week, I'm going to be joined by Emma Slade, who's the author of the book, here we go, Set Free. And I came across her book when I was traveling to Bhutan. So I actually listened to it to start with when I was traveling, because it's quite a long trip to get to Bhutan, and I went via Oman and then Delhi. And so that I could be at my utmost when I got to Bhutan, I sort of had a night in each as I traveled. So I listened to her book and I was blown away by it. So then I bought a copy. And as soon as I'd finished listening to it, which was like the day one in Bhutan, I sent her a message. I emailed her and she responded, and she was actually in Bhutan while I was there. So we actually met up, which was just mind blowing. And I then decided that when my book, Bees in Bhutan, here we go, when I published that, I decided that I would donate £1 from each copy of this book to her charity, Opening Your Heart to Bhutan. And it was just do me. So with Emma's book, I'm just going to try connecting again. I am actually on Ethernet, but it's obviously a bit unstable. Hopefully you are all still with me. So do comment so I know that you can still see me. I've got Wi-Fi and I've got Ethernet, so I should be absolutely fine here, but it seems to be a little bit unstable. And I know how irritating that is. I know when you're watching something and you just you don't want to have Hello, I'm back again. Let's see if I can. So do comment if you can see me. I'm just going to reconnect my screen. I'm so sorry about that. I have got Wi-Fi. I'm plugged into Ethernet, so I have no idea why I got disconnected. I didn't even talk about anything that could be illegal. So hopefully this time round it should be okay. So do comment, do let me know that you're here, that you can hear me. Okay. Third time lucky. Do you think I will be? Hello. Now, I'm just hoping that this will work. I've unplugged, plugged in again. I've got Wi-Fi and Ethernet, so they should be backing each other up. So let's see if this will work. It's when I seem to share a screen. Right, we've got the other screen. So I hope. There we go. So I was talking about the charity Opening Your Heart to Bhutan, which was just really, really special to me, because if I was still in the wheelchair, then there's no way I could have actually traveled to Bhutan. So those of you who don't know me, I was an artist. I had a career for 20 odd years, very successful, exhibited all around the world. And then I fell ill when I hit 40 years old, and I ended up spending the next 7 years bed and wheelchair bound with a condition called Ehlers-Danlos, which affects the connective tissue and it's often connected with being hypermobile. So that's when my whole transition changed, and through natural health, medicine, and minerals and the bees, my life transformed, and I am now an international bee expert. I travel around the world. I'm a honey sommelier, and I just have a real passion for sharing why bees are so important to us and what we can do to learn from the bees and how we can learn from the bees. So a lot of my learning about bees has come from traveling, and so traveling to various parts of the world. And Bhutan is where I went to back in 2018. And I had a marvelous trip where I was exploring the country and getting to meet beekeepers around the various regions. And I learned so much. So why Bhutan? Well, I had heard that Bhutan was an organic country. It was one of the first countries, or was the first country in the world, that not only being carbon positive, they were absorbing all the or carbon negative, they were absorbing all the carbon that we were producing in the rest of the world, but also they don't use chemicals in their agriculture. So to me, that sounded like somewhere that would be a perfect place for bees to live. And so when I hit 50 and I was now fully recovered, I thought, what a better place to celebrate being 50 than on top of the world, because I felt like I was on top of the world. And so I booked a trip to Bhutan. And it's quite a long journey. I needed to have quite a long time to be there. And so I decided to travel on my own. Because of the economies of time and finance. And because it was combined with my work, I wanted to study bees. I didn't want anybody with me who was going to get bored because I was just talking for hours with beekeepers. So I went on my own and I celebrated being 50 or turning 50 on top of the world. And so people often say, well, where is Bhutan? Well, it's in the Himalayas. So it's between Nepal, India and China. So quite often a route there is going to Kathmandu, but I actually went through India and then went up to Bhutan. And here the flight over, which was quite a bonus, we actually flew across Nepal and I could see Mount Everest. So that was incredible because I wasn't expecting that. I hadn't thought about that. I was so focused on Bhutan. And then the other photograph on the right here, you can see as we come into Paro, which is the only international airport in Bhutan, it is actually number one in the top 10 scary airports in the world. And there's only 8 pilots in the world who are allowed to or qualified to actually land here. So my husband was quite nervous, but luckily when we flew in, it was a beautiful sunny day and the views were spectacular. So nobody was scared. It is an organic country, as I mentioned before, so there's no chemicals used. The King of Bhutan and the government of Bhutan, a democratic government, have made this pledge to shift everything. So instead of measuring success by GDP, they actually measure it by happiness. And so all the decisions that are made are based on happiness. Oh my goodness. Hello, Pema. Hello. So good to have you here. Oh, I miss you. So here we go, a view of me flying in, and how wonderful to be joined by a real soul sister that I met while I was there. So it is organic. It's also a Buddhist nation, and that has a really big impact on how they care for their bees, how they care for their environment, and all aspects of their life. And I found the Buddhism really inspiring. And with my other travels in Oman and parts of Europe, I find that where people have a strong faith, there seems to have a difference or a special connection that they have with their bees. And so I was particularly interested in Bhutan because I wanted to know about the connection that Buddhists had with their bees, and if there was anything different, because I couldn't find much written about Buddhists and bees. But I'm going to share what I learned as we go through this afternoon. And of course, bees. I was fascinated to know about what sort of bees were in Bhutan and what was happening with them. Were they dying like the bees all around the rest of the world? Were people in Bhutan managing to save the bees? You know, what's happening? So my trip would not have been as amazing as it was if it wasn't for these two wonderful guys. So Wonchok on the left was my guide and Sonam on the right was my driver. And really interestingly, Sonam was a former monk, which you may find unusual, but it was very common that the eldest son of families in Bhutan would go and study in a monastery. And so quite often you find people have been monks for a certain proportion of their lives and then they leave. So I was fascinated with this, that he was once a monk and now he isn't, and he's married and he has children. So I said to him, what do the monks think about you leaving? You know, how does that affect, you know, your life? And he just said, it means that you'll have more challenges in life if you walk away from the monastery. So we did often chuckle about this because I felt that I was his challenge very much for this trip. And it was amazing because I wasn't doing the normal tourist route of particular temples and sightseeing where all the tourists would normally go. I had a quest to find out about bees. I wanted to find out bees. I wanted to find out about the people of Bhutan and the landscape and the flowers, and to find out why I was so drawn to visit this country. So Wonchuk and Sonam made my trip amazing, and they are both now bee experts. So the Bhutanese bee species, there is Apis cerana, which is the native honeybee. So very much like the honeybees we have here, that is the bee that has always been in Bhutan, and people have been collecting honey from Apis cerana for hundreds or thousands of years. Then you have Apis dorsata, which is the Asian giant bee. Now, what's interesting is the giant honeybee is all across Asia. And it's the bee that you see hanging up on the rock faces, and you have somebody climbing up a ladder with a smoke fire below, and they've got sort of baskets and sticks, and they're harvesting the honey. So this is the original sort of honey hunters bees. And these Apis dorsata, they make these huge combs that hang on rock faces, and really quite high up. I mean, they want to be out of reach of bears and humans. And these bees have an incredible defense mechanism. So they sort of wave. So you might have seen footage, or if not, have a look online and see if you can find it. But to deter attackers or people who are going to be trying to steal their honey, they do this sort of Mexican wave. So you see these sort of ripple effects of the bees. It's this super organism as it protects itself. But what's particularly interesting about Bhutan is they have, because they're in the Himalayas, there is a separate species of the giant honeybee. It was always thought they were all one, Apis dorsata, but in the Himalayas there's actually Apis laboriosa, which is a different species. So the dorsata is more orange and yellow coloured, and the dorsata is darker. And then I've got Apis florea, which I didn't get to see any Apis florea because they were mainly in the south of Bhutan. And again, this is a small Asian, Middle Eastern honeybee that produces honey and kept very much in the same way as Cerana and Apis mellifera. So Apis florea is there, and the Trigona, which is the stingless bee. In other parts of the world, it's known of as Melipona, very much a southern hemisphere, or the tropic regions. You get these stingless bees, and people have been collecting honey from them for thousands of years again. And much to my surprise, in Bhutan, they had Apis mellifera. Now, before I went, I had read a document by Nicola Bradbeer, who set up Bees for Development, and she had visited Bhutan in the 1980s, and by request of the government, and she was advising about how they should be keeping bees and how they could be using that for development, because bees can often help provide an extra income for farmers. And particularly women, a lot of women, it gives them a bit of extra money if they can keep the bees and sell the honey or the wax. But because of Apis cerana and because of the delicate nature, she had recommended that they don't import or bring in any other species because they have all their own species. So I was going there very much expecting to see Apis cerana, maybe florea, Apis dorsata and laboriosa, and to not see any of our Western honeybees because of, her recommendations. And also it makes sense. We now know throughout the world that it's not a good idea to be importing any other species from other parts of the world. So I was really very shocked when I actually got there to discover that just a few short years after Nicola had visited, a whole load, it was 5 colonies initially of Apis mellifera were brought into the Bumthang area, which is in central Bhutan. And they have now expanded to over 1,000 colonies that are spread across the centre of Bhutan. So there's nothing we can do about it. They're there and they seem to be thriving. So when I asked about the losses that beekeepers have, they were quite stunned. I mean, in the West, 20%, even as high when we first had insecticides, the neonics introduced, then bee losses could be 40-50% a year. And when I said, so what are your losses? And they were going, well, we don't quite understand what you mean. And then they were saying, well, it might be 1 colony or 2 colonies, but normally due to a bear. So they didn't have the disease problems. Now, what is interesting is that the Varroa Mite, which is one of the biggest problems in the West for the honeybee, was actually originally a pest that was with Apis cerana. So either it takes time to transfer and it hasn't yet transferred, so we just have to keep an eye on what's happening in Bhutan with their Apis mellifera. But Apis cerana has adapted to live with these Varroa mites. But Apis mellifera over here, we've had a real problem with Varroa mites. Although again, science are now backing up a lot of the natural beekeepers who felt that we need to let nature take its course. And what we found is that when bees are left to their own devices, they adapt. You do lose bees, but eventually they adapt and they recover and they can defend themselves from Varroa mite. So I am keeping in touch with beekeepers over there, and just to see what is happening, what is the situation. But generally their bees are healthier. So that ties in as well with my naturopathic studies, which is if you have a strong vitality, a strong life force with anything, be it trees, bees, humans, then you become resilient and strong, and you're not so affected by pests, diseases, and all the other ailments that eventually get us down to make us sick or even kill us. So could it be that the bees in Bhutan, because of their healthy diet and their healthy clean air and their environment, they're more resistant to disease? So this is something that I think could do with a lot more research. So this was my first Apis laboriosa. We were walking around and going up to visit temples, and this Apis laboriosa is on a marigold, which was in a temple garden. So I was really excited, and they are big. They are really huge. So I was able to take photographs of them, and I was really quite calm. But I'll tell you about my run-in. So this is what the Apis dorsata look like. So they hang off one big comb, and this is how you would normally see them. And you can see the size and how the image here of an Apis dorsata is much more orange than the laboriosa that I took a photograph of. And just to give you an idea of scale from the side, here's some photographs that show the Serrana is very, very similar to Apis mellifera. So it's very similar to our honeybees, but it is just a little bit smaller. It would be very difficult to tell the difference. And then the dorsata, you can see at the top, is a little bit larger. And here I am just with the family that Wonchuk, my guide, his family live on a hilltop in Trongsa, or just outside Trongsa. And it was just amazing to be able to, in November, to sit outside, and we'd have this wonderful clear blue skies, lovely sunshine, very, very quiet. There would only be a couple of days a week where aeroplanes were flying. You haven't got the sounds of heavy roads. It was just heavenly. And so it's the people of Bhutan that really make such a difference, and such a warm welcome. So even though they could all understand English, but they were very shy. They didn't get a lot of experience to speak English. And of course, my Bhutanese is not very good. And so we still shared a meal together and sat outside. And this photograph now is even more poignant because, it's many parts of the world you're just not able to sit outside. So, or with people you love. We've just had Mother's Day, and I know many of you weren't able to spend it with your mothers. So here's a map that just shows the central part that I spent the beginning of my travels. So I went to Bumthang, and you can just see, I'm not sure if I can move, I don't know if you can see my little arrow, but Jakar is the airport. So I flew from Paro, the international airport, and went to Jakar. And that region is called Bumthang, and it's a real farming region, but it's also where the beekeeping cooperative is based in Bhutan. And you can see this red line, and that is the road. That is the road that goes across the centre of Bhutan. And there are some smaller roads that come off, but not many at all. And quite a lot of the road has only recently been tarmacked or paved. So transport across Bhutan is very difficult, and it's very wiggly. It's a mountainous country, and so the roads are really tricky. So where we think of transporting bees or transporting honey or anything, even furniture, when you get to Bhutan, you have a completely different understanding of where you throw things away. There is no places away because you can't get things in and out. And so furniture and belongings are kept and treasured, and they're made to last because you can't just replace them. You don't just do up your house every year with whatever the latest look is. You have things that last for lifetimes. And when you start traveling around these roads, you understand that. You get to have a better understanding of how Bhutan works and how we can sort of look at it as a simple life, but actually it's much more in tune with nature. It's much more working with the environment. And one of the main key things about Bhutan is there is a commitment that 75% or minimum of 65% of the country is covered in forest always. So they really restrict the building and development. And in actual fact, nearly 75% of the land is still covered in forest. And it was seeing the trees in Bhutan that really had such an impact on me. And ever since my trip there, I've been looking at trees differently. I've been reading more books about trees and about their connection underground with the mycelium, the fungi that connects them, which now we know bees are also connected with mycelium. And this massive connection. But to see hundreds of thousands of acres of forests that have just not ever been cut down, to see ancient trees. And there are so few places around the world that we get to see that. And the penny drop for me, last year, 2020, when I first became aware about the HS2 development, where a high-speed railway is being built across the UK, and some ancient trees are coming down, and we don't have many ancient trees in the UK, not compared to somewhere like Bhutan. And I suddenly understood that when you take down a 200-year-old tree, it's no good planting 100 other trees to replace that one tree, because it takes 200 years to replace that tree. The wisdom and the knowledge and the health that goes into that tree takes 200 years. And so this is this kind of thing that we need to understand about Bhutan. Their forests and their environment and their soil and their land and their interconnectedness with everything is sustainable. And it's because they have this understanding. And where we seem to think that everything is a commodity, and if you take away one and replace it with 200, you sort of feel you're in credit, but you're not. So there's these little things that you learn, and I never forget Bhutan. Almost every day I have another thought about Bhutan, and another thing makes sense. And until you go and see these places or really have an understanding of a completely different way of life, it's very difficult to step outside of how we're living and see how it could be improved. And you can see behind me this painting here, which a friend did last year, which is a heart but of trees. It's called Bees and Trees. And it's just that understanding that bees need trees because the trees feed the bees. So everything is connected. So this is when I first arrived in Paro, and the view from the hotel I was staying in. And it gives you an idea of the landscape and how sort of each house is really a small holding. And so there's lots and lots of tiny little farms, and they have these terraces where they have rotating crops. So it'll be buckwheat and rice, and then various vegetables. So people are generally eating in season. They're eating food that they've grown locally or their family have grown and sent to them. And just where the sun is on the mountains in the background, that is Tiger's Nest. So it's the most distinctive temple that or monastery that people recognize or associate with Bhutan. And at the end of my trip, I did a 2-day trek and trekked right across the tops of those mountains and then dropped down to Tiger's Nest, which I highly recommend. So anyone going to Bhutan, when it does open up again, that's the trip. That is the way to see Tiger's Nest. So when I flew across to Bumthang, and I met my guides, and they had been briefed that I really wanted to know all about bees, and that was my thing. You know, I just wanted to learn about bees. And amazingly, my hotel was just 2 doors away from the Beekeeping Association in Bhutan, in Bumthang. And so we took left my bags behind, took a little walk, and there we saw these beehives. Now, at this point, I didn't know that the Apis mellifera had been imported. So I was looking at these hives and thinking, gosh, they look just like my bees, as these bees were coming and going. So it wasn't until I met these beekeepers, Naveen and Pretty, who again were just a couple of doors away from my hotel. And then I understood that these Apis mellifera had been brought in. So just 5 colonies 20 years ago, and now there is a lot more. There's about 1,000 colonies. So Naveen and Pretty have their own bees. They have about 150 hives, and they take from their bees, they take this honey. And so I'm going to taste with you this honey, and it's a mix. It's a buckwheat, but it's also the wildflowers. And what I first noticed is you have that richness. Buckwheat is one of the honeys that comes quite close to manuka. It's known to have a lot of active ingredients, so it can be used for medicinal purposes. I believe all honey is medicinal, but buckwheat is one of the recognized ones. And what I loved about his honey was it was just so fresh, and yet it was complex as well. There's all these different flavors. So you've got a little bit of toffee. There's a slight bitterness, which you get with buckwheat. This has crystallized since I've got it home. Unfortunately, the label got a bit damaged during transport, but he calls it Druck honey. And Naveen is doing his best to get his honey over here, because I really want to be having some of the Bhutanese honey, but it's been really difficult with COVID and with shipping. And of course, because of the weight limits of getting things in and out of Bhutan, you are restricted to having small amounts. So he's been experimenting with single variety honeys. So he's been having hives in different areas on his small farm and in the land around him. And so he's got some incredible different varieties. And that's really exciting. And I think we really want to encourage more beekeepers working with their bees and having small quantities of different varieties of honey, because I think it's how we learn about the land. It's how we learned about the flowers and about the connection of them all. And so here's his bees on their frames, just busy. And that was November, really busy, full hives. Now, Naveen was great because he just knows everybody. Although you find in Bhutan, nearly everybody knows everybody else. There's only a population of about 700,000. And so people tend to be related, or they know neighbours or friends. So it was great for trying to connect with people. So Naveen introduced me to this wonderful guy, Kabir Raj. Now, Kabir Raj is a bit of a honey expert, and he's also got 150 hives. He's been beekeeping for 10 or 20 years, really experienced. And he's from southern Bhutan, but lives in the Bumthang region. And he was amazing. So him and his family invited us to stay, and we were tasting honeys. And he had a really large collection of honeys, and they were from different types of bee species as well. So I was making notes, and we were tasting the honeys. And poor Sonam, my driver, I did learn just before we went to see Kabir Raj that the monks believe, and the Bhutanese Buddhists believe, that taking honey is a sin. So the Buddha had a tiny drop of honey on his tongue, and he was then punished for 100 years. So a lot of Bhutanese don't take honey. But it's a bit more complex than that, because they have a relationship with animals in the country. They don't representing me, and any impact on the environment. So something I found even for me, quite shocking. And I'm not a vegetarian, but I don't eat a lot of meat. But I love to have high welfare. If I eat any food, then I like to know that it's being cared for. But to see these rivers, these amazing fast flowing rivers, and I knew that my husband Greg would be going, wow, imagine fishing in there. But nobody fishes in the rivers because they save their wildlife. So imagine being in a country where the wildlife is left wild. It's not all eaten. So we got to taste some different honeys. And he was then telling me about the Beekeeping Association and the problems they have. So because the local people do not eat a lot of honey, the Bhutanese are very dependent on the tourists to buy the honey. And so where they have these bees, and they've been encouraged to do more beekeeping and therefore have more honey, they have a surplus of honey because there isn't the population to actually eat the honey. So this is where I really want to help. I really want to raise awareness of Bhutanese honey and connect them with people outside Bhutan, so that other people can share the joy of honey, because we like eating the honey. So this is one of his, which is wildflowers from his area. So now I'm just going to show you. You can see that this is separated, so it's a bit liquid at the top and it's solid beneath. Now that is natural, that is normal. All honeys will crystallize, or just about all honeys will crystallize, and it's all dependent on the balance of sugars inside the honey. So if a honey has a high fructose balance, so there's fructose, glucose and sucrose inside honey. Fructose comes from mainly fruit flowers, so fruit trees, so apple blossom, blackberry blossom, perhaps borage, and acacia, the acacia tree. Because it has a high fructose, it doesn't crystallize, and so those honeys will stay runny. But just about all the other honeys will eventually crystallize, and it takes time. So different honeys take different times, and it will crystallize from the bottom up. So if you see a honey and it looks a bit more liquid at the top than it does at the bottom, that's absolutely fine. So you can just stir it up. But what isn't right is if it's liquid at the bottom and solid at the top, because that means it's fermented. And that happens when there's too much water in the honey. So, or there could be impurities, too many impurities, and so it's fermented it. And if the beekeeper takes the honey before it's all ripe, before it's been capped, then there's a higher chance of that happening. So here we go. So this is a bit of Kabiraj's honey. Now there's really strong citrus notes, and it's very fresh, and it's cleansing the palate, which is quite unusual. But absolutely tasty. And this is just a wildflower from his region. But he also gave me a pot of this, and this is, every now and again you get a really amazing honey, and this is one of those amazing honeys. Now he has bees, but he takes them up to Highland Meadows, which are 4,000 meters above sea level. Now, Apis mellifera are not meant to be able to go that high, so this is really unusual. But when they are this high, there's wild cherry, there's clover. I'm just trying to think what the other plants were. Now this has, rhododendron. It has a completely different texture. It started to crystallize, but it's quite solid grains. So, you know, like sugar crystals in your mouth, but they do dissolve. And then it leaves this really tropical fruit flavor. That is an amazing honey. You can see he's just experimenting. It wasn't even labeled. It wasn't a honey that he sells or markets, but that's a honey that I want to try and get hold of. So he shared that with me, which was amazing. And then he also told me about the stingless bees. Now, I hadn't really heard much about stingless bees before I went to Bhutan. And when I was at the airport, waiting to travel across Bhutan, I found this little jar of honey. And these were sold for about £3 each. And I thought, well, these are a good little gift and they're not too heavy. So I will take these to give to my bee team. And I hadn't tasted them. And what's interesting is they come in a bottle with a dropper. Oops. Now, the stingless bees are a bit more like our bumblebees. So they live in a small colony and they have these little cups of wax that the queen will make, and then she'll put some nectar and some pollen in to feed the grub, lay an egg. And this kind of honey has been harvested for thousands of years, but it's been known to be used, and it has been used for thousands of years, as a medicine for eyes. So I've not been brave enough to try it as eye drops, but that is how it's treated. Now, I've since learned a lot more about stingless bees, particularly from South America. And this one, I'm not sure if you can see it. It's very, very runny, but you can see it's really quite dark honey. But sometimes the stingless bee honey is yellow or red, but it's very, very watery, really, really watery. Can you see? So I drip that. And the taste is quite different. It's really, really citrusy. So it's sort of, but it doesn't have the sourness that you get with lemons. But it is just this zingy, like a really good lemon sorbet. You've got that, that it really does pack a punch. So it's amazing honey. Now, when I went to Apimondia in 2019 in Canada, and I was asked to do a poster presentation about my trip to Bhutan, about the bees of Bhutan. And because I had a picture of the stingless bees honey there, I had quite a few scientists come and talk to me about stingless bees. And I met these researchers from Taiwan, and they were showing me this little video of them harvesting so that I could see how they harvest the honey from stingless bees. And what was funny was, you think stingless bees, and yet in the video, people were harvesting the honey and that was fine. But then somebody ran away and they were doing this sort of classic, flapping that you would do if you were being attacked by bees. And I said, why is he running away? They're stingless bees. And these guys said, they don't sting, but they bite. Well, what was very interesting is they bite you around your eyes. So this ties in with my belief that the bee stings, and with most apotherapists believe that the bee stings, they sting you to heal you. So how fascinating that the trigona or the melipona bees, the stingless bees around the world, their honey has been used to treat the eyes for thousands of years. But if they bite you, they go for the eyes. Isn't that amazing? So here we are having lunch in Kabiraj's house, and he was so generous. His family was so kind. They were so welcoming, and we spent most of the day there. And there's my driver, Sonam, who, as a former monk, knows that it's a sin to be eating honey, but being so polite and eating all these different honey samples. And we were given a big bowl, each honey. It was a big bowl. You can just see at the bottom of the picture there, the sort of size bowl, and he was just dishing out the honey. And the thing is, just since 2018, I've learned so much more about honey, and I've experienced so many different honeys that I'd love to go back and do that tasting again with my new knowledge, just to really make some clearer notes about those honeys. So I have got to go back. I've really got to go back and visit. So Pema, you've got to tell them I've got to go back. So here we go, it's another picture, and you notice the big pot of rice. And this was also when I had my first taste of the national dish, which is chili and cheese, which you won't tend to get in many of the hotels because the Western palate cannot cope with that kind of quantity of chili. But I found if you go as a visitor, you'd be offered it first. So if you just make sure you have a larger quantity of cheese than chilies, then you can just about palate it. So it was the standard joke that, me being from England, I wasn't going to be able to eat the chili and cheese. But I found, luckily, I can cope with a bit of chili. So I did enjoy chili and cheese. And my guides then would tell the hotels I was staying in that, oh, yes, she can have spicy food, because otherwise the food had all the chili removed so as not to upset any of the tourists. But amazing food and amazing hospitality. So very grateful. And this is their beautiful house. Again, as a former artist, I loved the fact that in Bhutan you have artists, and it's a busy career where they go around and paint the houses. So the houses are all decorated. So how wonderful. With all these beautiful, beautiful painted houses, and different regions have different patterns, and there's symbolism with the designs as well. So these are some of Kabiraj's hives. They're the Langstroth hives, and they were being shut down for winter. So you've got a brood box and one super, and then these massive pebbles brought up from the river in the valley to sort of protect them through snow and winds and rain. So then, after visiting Kabiraj, he introduced me to the Beekeeping Association, and I had a meeting with the officers who are running this program with beekeeping and supporting beekeepers across the country. And then we walked to the end of the river and walked across this bridge. So, this is how we picture, the Himalayas, these wonderful rickety bridges across fast-flowing rivers. But when we got to the other side, I suddenly had some buzzing around my ear, and I did have a bit of a panic because it sounded like a hornet. It was so big. And what was it? It was Apis laboriosa. And just along the side of the footpath, tucked away, was this hive. So they were only about 7 foot off the ground. And for some reason, they were interested in me as I walked past. So I didn't get stung, but I had one buzzing around and caught in my hair. But luckily, one chuck managed to untangle it. But they knew me, and when we went back with a car and with my camera, and I was trying to get some close photographs, you couldn't get very close before they'd come out and attack you. So they know that humans like their honey. So I did have a close encounter with the Apis laboriosa. But normally this is the kind of landscape you would find them. So this is the road that was going off further to the east, to Uro, that we went and visited. And you have these wonderful valleys, steep valleys in the rocks. And then the bees will be having these hanging comb that they would just attach to the rocks. So this is why they're called the rock bees. And there's actually a whiskey company or brandy company that ferments the rock bee honey, and they call it rock bee honey. So quite often honey, and you would have noticed from an earlier photograph, will be just stored in these old brandy bottles. Quite a lot of them are plastic. They're plastic brandy bottles, but filled with honey. So, you know, recycling, reusing, but quite appropriate to have rock bee brandy bottles storing your honey. And then, of course, the wonderful, wonderful prayer wheels. Wherever you go, there's temples and there's the prayer wheels. And it's not right to walk past them without spinning them. And here is an Apis cerana that I saw quite high up at one of the monasteries just near the burning lake. And again, it was, we were about 3,800 meters, and there was some bees on the marigolds. So that was really lovely to be able to see them. And then another day we drove to Trongsa when we visited Wonchuk's family, and there's a temple there. And of course, the monks are so photogenic. Their red and orange robes and the whitewashed buildings. But I was really interested to know about the monks and the bees. And in Bhutan, there's a real custom for burning lamps, butter lamps, but they use yak butter, and a lot of yak butter. And I couldn't understand why they weren't using beeswax. And I still don't know why they're not using beeswax. It could be, again, because it's a product from the bee and they don't want to extract it. But at this monastery in Trongsa, their bees have moved into that sort of bell tower. And so the monks were saying, oh, yes, the bees live up there. So it's lovely that the bees travel around. And this also confirms my my learnings and my beliefs about bees being attracted to spiritual areas and geopathic stress lines. So all the zongs, which are the temples and monasteries and really significant buildings that are dotted around Bhutan, a lot of prayer and meditation and thought has gone into the placement of them, and they are placed on very important areas. And also in the West, we think of ley lines or sites of specific interest, so Glastonbury Tor and Stonehenge, and then our churches are often positioned on these lines. Well, it turns out that these lines, although they might be called ley lines, they're technically geopathic stress lines. And what happens is when the water is flowing underground, it creates a different vibration, a higher vibration, a frequency that becomes like a curtain that goes up to the sky. And the frequency of that matches the frequency of bees. So when I'm placing bait hives or I'm looking for swarms, I have a good idea where the bees are going to be drawn to from dowsing to find out where these geopathic stress lines are. So I found it particularly interesting that across Bhutan, the wild bees are migrating, and here we are again in Trongsa having the picnic. But they are migrating to these temples. So you'll see them hanging from the temple windows, which I'll show you in a bit. So it's really incredible that around the world, the bees are connected. And I think there is such a spiritual link with bees. And so how wonderful that they love to live with the monks. So just near that temple is where Wonchuk's family were. And here we were on the mountaintop in their their small farm in the garden and looking out over the mountains, where Wanchuk, before he was a guide, he was looking after their cattle. So he would travel around all these mountain tops with his cattle grazing. So the culture has changed, because with tourism, there was suddenly a new opportunity for him to learn and to take people like me around the country. And I was so impressed with their knowledge of their history and the history of Buddhism and the history of all their deities. It was very complex, and there's a lot of things to remember. So it's been very difficult for them in Bhutan with COVID, because they haven't had any tourists coming. So the guides have not had the work to do. So they're having to go back to their families. So it's a really, really difficult time all round. And just to show the emphasis of spirituality, the largest room in their house was their temple. And so this beautiful, beautiful room in the house, which is where the family will gather for religious ceremonies. And it was just so amazing. So their faith, their prayer is every part of their life, and just so important. So no wonder the bees are happy there, when you have people who are living in tune with nature, in tune with spirit, and with immense gratitude for what they have. So here we go, another Apis laboriosa. So I was really excited to be able to see them foraging on flowers. And here you can see on the temples where the large comb has been attached. Now, these don't have any bees on. This was actually in Punakha, and the bees had left, but you can actually see the comb left. So I asked a monk, I said, what do you do with the wax comb? You know, do you melt it down? And he said, no, it crumbles, falls to the ground. We sweep it up and throw it away. So, you know, that's really interesting, because they could be making some incredible wax, some wax candles, you know, with all this beeswax, because the bees will return. Sometimes they'll return to those same combs, and they'll just, you know, expand them. So you'll see some darker parts and thinner parts, but they'll take most of the honey away with them when they transport. But some of these still had thick wodges of honey attached to the comb, where they just, because nobody's harvesting it, they have plenty of honey. So it's absolutely incredible. And here we go, another view. So the dark parts are where the brood were. So it's where the queen had laid the eggs, and they would have just completely coated that. So they're not in a box, they're living outside in the wild. So that's why the dorsata move around the countryside as they, you know, depending on the temperatures. So hello. I've been thinking of you, Sajan, with the tasting of honey. So good to see you. Thank you for joining me. So here we go. This is Paro, and again, you can see these beautiful zongs, and then the bees would just be attached. So they're quite out of reach. I mean, you can't, but there was quite a lot of funny little signs up. And this one said, please do not ring or fiddle the bell, which just made me giggle a bit. So obviously people see this bell and are tempted to ring it, but you can't actually take photographs inside any of the temples, just in the gardens and the areas outside. But I think that's lovely. These are sacred spaces, and the paintings inside the temples are just phenomenal and ancient. So here we go again, traveling around the countryside. The beekeepers were preparing their bees for the winter. So some of them are being fed, just to make sure that they've got enough supplies. And also, when we were quite high up, sort of 3,000 meters up, then people had old duvets and blankets and rugs that were all put around their hives to give them extra insulation, because it does get quite cold there. And once the sun goes behind the mountains, the temperatures really plummet. So while I was there in November, in some areas it would get up to 25 degrees, and then at night it would be sort of minus 5 or more. I mean, Pema could probably tell me more about the actual temperatures, but I do know it was bitterly cold if you were out when the sun was behind the mountains. So this was a really good way of having your guides, because they made sure that you went to all the right places and got the best weather, because they just know the landscape. So the only time I really got caught in the cold was the night before my birthday, and I was flying back across the country, and so they drove. So it's a long drive, it's like an 8-hour drive, and so they had to meet me at the other end. So they set off. So I had a few hours without them. And then I'd gone shopping in Bhutan because having two males with me, they didn't quite understand the female need to have a browse around the shops and to do some gift shopping. And it took longer than I thought. And it was a beautiful afternoon when they left me. And so I didn't have my coat because I thought, oh, it's so lovely. And I didn't intend to be out long. But by the time I started walking back, it was really, really cold. The sun had gone down and I had my scarf wrapped around my face. And it was that kind of cold that you didn't want any skin exposed because you just froze. So being from England, we're not used to that kind of extreme temperature. So I'm a bit of a wuss when it came to that cold temperature. So here's a map showing back towards the west and the capital city, Thimphu. So I flew back to Paro and then we drove to Thimphu, so along this red wiggly road. And this is quite a main road because Thimphu is the capital. And of course, most people have to fly into Paro and then drive to Thimphu. So we drove there and we went through all the apple orchards. And that, I think, were the royal beehives that were being looked after at the government offices. So they were there for the winter, but normally they would have been in Thimphu for the summer. And while in Thimphu, I met up with Emma. So at the beginning, when I had my internet glitches, you may or may not have seen this, but on my flight over, because I took a couple of days, I travelled through Oman and then Delhi, I listened to this book, which is called Set Free by Emma Slade. And I wanted to read as many books as I could about Bhutan before I went, so I'd have an understanding of the country. And this book is phenomenal, and Emma is phenomenal. And she was a banker, a British banker. And she had an extraordinary experience when she was, I think it was in Singapore, and it changed her life. It was a very traumatic experience. And to come to terms with that, she then did more yoga, more meditation. And eventually, following a trip to Bhutan, she met an amazing Buddhist master, a Lama, who became her teacher, and she then has become a nun, a Buddhist nun. So she still lives in England, but she set up a charity called Opening Your Heart to Bhutan. And she has done amazing, amazing work for the Bhutanese. And what I loved about her and the charity, as well as the whole synchronicity that I read her book and she happened to be in Thimphu when I was there. So we met up for dinner. But it was also the fact that she supports disabled children. Now, when I was disabled, there's no way I could have travelled around Bhutan. You know, all those years I was in a wheelchair, I couldn't have been trekking up mountains. You know, everything would have been impossible. I just couldn't have done it. So to imagine being a child born in Bhutan who not only can't walk, but doesn't even have access to a wheelchair. So Emma has done phenomenal work with supporting children. So that's why when I wrote my book, A Quest for Bees in Bhutan, I decided to donate £1 from every copy of the book goes to her charity, Opening Your Heart in Bhutan. So this time next week, I'm actually going to be interviewing Emma. So if you join me the same time next week, you can talk to Emma and ask her questions, and she'll be sharing her story and talking about the work they're doing in Bhutan. So I got to meet her, and she taught me a bit more about the Buddhists and the bees. Now in yoga, there is actually a breath, a bee breath. So she knew about that. But she told me this lovely story, or she shared with me. Imagine that you know that in a nearby cave or tree, there is a delicious store of honey, but it's surrounded by a swarm of angry bees, so that although you know the honey is there, you can't get to enjoy it. And then along comes an expert beekeeper who carefully takes away the bees, and at last you can enjoy the honey. The Buddha is like such a beekeeper who skillfully helps everyone to remove all their buzzing, their stinging anger and greed and unhelpful ideas, so that they can enjoy at last the pure honey of perfect wisdom. So how wonderful is that, to have this poem and this analogy of comparing the bees with the wisdom of the joys and the wisdom of life. I later found that in Buddhism, and particularly the Buddhist monks, they believe that the highest level of reincarnation is as a bee. So when you understand that, it has a greater meaning of why you wouldn't be eating the honey, because it's eating the product of your ancestors, you know, your wise teachers. So I have this amazing feeling that the people in Bhutan are already more spiritually aware or more advanced, or at a higher level of reincarnation, and that's why they don't need to be eating the meat. That's why they can live in harmony with their land. So that's why Bhutan is such an important place to teach the world right now, while we're in this place of transition. Oh, hello, Navin. Oh, brilliant. I was tasting your honey earlier, so you'll have to watch this. It'll go up and you'll be able to watch it later. So then when we were around Punakha, we travelled across the centre before we did our big trip down to Serang. And I saw one of these bees. Perhaps you know what type of bee it is. But what I did find interesting is I couldn't find any books or catalogues that show the different bee species in Bhutan. So although there are the honeybees, which all around the world, people are aware about honeybees because we take the honey from them. But what's really important is understanding all the other species. So there's 22,000 species of bees in the world, and only 11 of them make honey. So the rest are really important pollinators. But unfortunately, they're the ones that are being wiped out due to agricultural chemicals, farming, loss of habitat, loss of food. And one of the things people always say is, oh, I really want to save the bees, so I want to get a beehive. But when you get a beehive, you're bringing in 50,000 more hungry mouths to feed. So it's really important that we understand all the different native bees that we have in our area, so that we can make sure we have enough food for them and we understand their life cycle and their connection with plants. So I'd love to go back and just be watching bees. I did find an article a couple of days ago that was published in a Bhutanese newspaper, where a researcher was sort of making an account of all the different species, and he was mainly interested in moths and butterflies and birds. However, he did note that they found 70 species of bees in Bhutan. So that is fascinating. So I would love to, and I did try to get in touch, but I couldn't contact them through the website. So I've got to do a bit more digging there. But absolutely amazing that there's 70 species of bees. But in the UK, we have 270 species of bees. So in fact, I would imagine that Bhutan could have thousands of species because of their environment. And it's just a case of nobody's been there counting them and looking at them yet. Oh, hello, Frank. Hello, lovely to see you. So here's a picture. Now, right at the top, you'll see Punakha, and just to the top left, you'll see Thimphu, which is the capital. And what we did was we drove down that yellow line down the centre, and we went to Serang. So it took about 4.5 hours from Wangdu, which is just south of Punakha. And we drove down along this river where they're actually building a huge hydroelectric dam. And anyone interested in engineering, it was, the scale of it was phenomenal. Anyway, we went down to Serang because that's where the honey houses were. And as we got down to the region, you find that there's the beekeepers selling their local honey, so particularly the Apis cerana honey, and these market stalls just along the river. And then we turned off from the river and we went up into the mountains. And this area is a really fascinating part of Bhutan. So the king has given each family 4 acres of land so that they can farm and make themselves self-sufficient. And this area, because it was underpopulated and they didn't want to overpopulate central Bhutan, a lot of families set up in this area. And it's absolutely stunning. And you just twist around these little roads, and there's these small holdings, there's orchards, and it's an amazing, again, this is November, you see this beautiful clear blue sky. It really was quite warm, sort of 25 degrees, absolutely beautiful. And then we got to the end of the road, and this was a government building there, and we were met by one of the beekeeping and sort of landscape rangers, and he took us. We walked across paddy fields and through orchards. There were citrus orchards and cardamom orchards. And then we started to come across these honey houses. So these are homes that are built, and they actually have beehives in the walls of the houses. And this one had some log hives as well. So you'll see there's that sort of cube in the top left upstairs, and that's actually a box hive. But there would also be these round cylindrical log hives where the bees just move in, and then the beekeepers will take honey from them, but they're taking small quantities. So one of these houses could have 11 or 12 hives around the house through the summer, and each hive they'll take between 2 and 5 kilos of honey during harvest time. So it's small quantities and sustainable. And here's Bim and his family, and we were he was very, very, very kind and let us come in. And you can see the sort of square just behind his shoulder. That is the entrance to the bees in his house. And I was also reminded that the bees are coming and going, and they're stood there by their front door, and the bees are coming and going. And look, there's young children, they're living there, they have a table there, so they're living with the bees, and they're not wearing bee suits, they're not worrying about the bees. And it reminded me of a historical talk I went to about the history of beekeeping in the UK. And beekeepers here used to keep their bees in skeps. And during the winter months, we would move the skeps to the walls of our houses or by our front path. And the idea was that as you were coming and going through the winter months, you'd say, good morning, bees, good evening, bees. And they'd be familiar with you, so that when you moved them to the orchards and then you started opening them up in the springtime, they knew who they were and you were less likely to get stung. Now we've forgotten all that. And now what happens is the bees are put out and they're left all winter. And then the first sunny days of spring, we go out and visit our hives. And of course, the bees don't know who we are, so they are more likely to be aggressive. And it's matched by the statistic that the more people are stung by bees in April in the UK than any other time of the year. And the people who are stung by bees in April are beekeepers. So we can learn from people that are living with the bees. So if we go and visit our bees, and that's what I do throughout the winter, is I visit my colonies as much as I can, so that they still know who I am, so that when I do want to take the honey, they know that I'm a friend and not a foe. I'm going to make sure there's enough left for them. So there's a closer picture. And you can see, I hope you can see that, there are quite a few bees buzzing around. Quite a high-pitched buzz, quite a few bees around. You'll be wondering who I was. So this is the entrance. So what they'll do is they'll just pull away that loose bit and then take some combs of honey out and then replace it. So always leaving the brood undisturbed or as much as possible. And this farmer, he grows cardamom and he grows citrus, and so he sold me some of his honey, and I got it in one of those the whiskey bottles or the brandy bottles, but I shared it out with Wongchuk and Sonam because I couldn't bring it all home. And this is all I've got left now. So I do have to do another trip. But this is amazing honey. And this honey, it really taught me a lot about honey tasting. So there was somebody here earlier, Sajan, he's a honey taster and a judge like me. And This honey has been pressed, so it hasn't been spun in a machine. Literally, the comb has come out and it's just been pressed so the honey drips out. And so you're going to have bits of brood, bits of wax. So it has a completely different texture. And you get this a lot with African honeys where they're pressed, or from anywhere in the world where they don't have the sort of high-tech machinery that we use here. I had to have more of that. But that is magical honey. You can taste the citrus, you can taste the sunshine, but you've also got a bit of the cardamom, so there is that spicy kick. So absolutely amazing honey, and I'm just so lucky to have had that experience and to have spent some time there. What really amazed me was at the end of my trip, the last night, I was talking with Sonam and Wonchuk and just saying, what was your favorite part of the trip? You know, excuse me. Was I the big challenge that Sonam had been promised from the monks? And I thought that this particular trip, because it was such a long day driving, it was 4.5 hours there, 4.5 hours back. And when we were there, it was so difficult because we were then the ranger, the beekeeping officer there. He'd said that if we had another hour, he could have taken us right out completely off-road through farms to a village where there was a whole village of houses that all had bees. And I would love to have gone there, but it was just too far and we couldn't find anywhere to stay down there that night. So we had to get back. So it was a real shame, but I thought that that was the day that Sonam would have cursed me, that we'd had this really long day, mostly in the car. But on that last night, when I said, what was your favorite part? He said going down to Serang was the best part of him being my driver for the time I was there, because he's got young children and he could see this simple life. So even in Bhutan, where as a visitor, you sort of think everybody's living the same kind of life, but they're not. There's a huge range of different lifestyles across this country, and for him to see this family living a subsistence life, they're growing the food they need, they have the sunshine, the children are happy running around barefoot, whereas he's living in the city, so it's much more of a Western lifestyle where you have a job, and of course he's having to be away from his family a lot as he's driving people like me around, and you've got more of a growing city. So it was really lovely because not many tourists would have done this kind of trip, and it's not on the normal tourist route. So he got to experience something that he would never have done otherwise. So I was really pleased that at least he wasn't cursing me, and it was more of a blessing than a challenge for him to do that. And these were the kind of roads he was having to drive on. And what was hilarious was there was so much potential for road rage. And I could hear, you know, all the men in my life, as if they were with me saying, oh, you know, silly drivers, or we can't do this, or that's too narrow, or they're going too fast, or they're going too slow. But in Bhutan, there's none of that. People are so chilled out. There's monkeys in the road and everyone just stops and giggles. You know, there's people laying tarmac in the road and we just turn the engine off and sit and have a chat, listen to some music. And then you have these lorries coming towards you and we literally just breathe in. And for somehow we got past, which was quite incredible. And then on my last 2 days, I did the trek going up above the tiger's nest, and this is looking down on the climb up, and you can see the runway, and this gives you an idea of just how dangerous that runway is in Paro in Bhutan. So it is the top, the number one out of the top 10 most difficult airstrips to land in the world. So as I said at the beginning, there's only 8 pilots who are qualified to land here, and you know, because there's so few flights, everything stops when you hear a plane, and it's so refreshing to have that silence, that real silence that's mainly filled with birds and the rustle of trees rather than cars and planes. And at the top of the mountain, this is the Bumdrak trek, so you can just see the little green tents we were camping in, and then there was this temple right on top, and there was a monk just sat there on his mobile phone. But what a view to be looking out over Bhutan. And then as we descended down to see the Tiger's Nest Monastery, I was lucky enough to see this huge clump of ivy that was flowering, and I got to see all 3 species of bees. So I saw the Laboriosa, which you can see, I think that one's a Laboriosa there, and then I also saw the Apis mellifera and Apis cerana. So I saw 3 different species of bees. I could not, despite us standing there for a very long time trying to take photographs, I couldn't get a photograph of them all together, but I did get to see them all on that ivy, so that was very special. And then here we are at the Tiger's Nest, although it's very it's quite different when you get there, because although you think you're nearly there, you actually have to descend the cliff and come back the other side. So from that point where I've got the photograph where you think, oh, I'm there, you've probably got another 1,000 steps, 500 steps down, 500 steps up before you get there. And then you have to do it again to come back. So, but absolutely magical. And I'm going to end with this, because this is the sound of Bhutan. So as you trek down the mountains, that whenever there's a little stream, somebody will have put up this bell and prayer wheels, so that you can just be grateful and enjoy the silence. So yeah, slow down to Bhutanese time. So thank you so much for joining me. I'm sorry about the start where we had this problem with the Wi-Fi, but hopefully you've been able to enjoy. And I'm just going to answer any questions if anybody's got any questions. And I will share, if you want to buy one of my books, The Bees in Bhutan, I've got the link here. I'm going to post it in the comments so that you can just click on there. And I'm doing free postage, so just put free shipping in the when you check out, and then you'll actually be able to have it posted for free. But that's just in the UK. I'm really sorry if you're further afield, I can't afford to do the free shipping. But tell you what, if you message me and and you want to have a copy of Bees in Bhutan, then I will put some extras in for you, so some special treats. So there we go. There's those links. So if you want to have a book. So if you've got any questions, then just ask. I think actually it won't let me post the links while I'm online, so I will post them as soon as I finish. So if you come back to this, then you'll find them. You'll find it there. So I'm so delighted to see so many familiar faces here, and Kat all the way from Singapore. It's wonderful. So as I said before, next week I'm going to have Emma here, and she has got an amazing story, and I've got a copy of her book. So if you join me next week, then if you want, I'll set a little quiz. So if somebody wants the book, and then I can send it out to you. So I'll be joined by Emma, the nun from Bhutan. So we'll be talking about what the charity does and how we can all help them. So that's the Opening Your Heart to Bhutan. So again, I've tried to post the link, but you can find it. So just look up Opening Your Heart to Bhutan. But there's some links there. So thank you, Frank. I'm glad you're a great fan of my book. So thank you very much. So if there are no questions, I will leave you be. I need to have more water because I've had so much honey. But I am doing my best. So Naveen, as soon as you can ship your honey, just let me know. because I really want to have some of the Bhutanese honey over here so that you can all taste some of the amazing honey. So at the beginning I tasted Navin, so his was the buckwheat honey. So do watch this back. If you came at the end, then just go back to the beginning and start again, and then see all the honeys. So thank you very much. I'm really pleased that you've been able to join me this afternoon, and I look forward to those of you who are around the world. I miss you so much. I can't wait till I can see you again. And of course, if you get to travel before I do, then just come and say hello, come and see me. So and then you can taste some of my honeys from around the world. So lots of love to everybody. Have a wonderful evening, and I will see you all sometime soon. Thank you.